Well, thanks everyone for coming to our panel discussion. The topic of erasing friction to increase revenue and improve your customer experience. We're really excited about the panelists that are here. I'm Craig Nishizaki. I'll be the moderator, trying to keep the fighting down, the clawing, the friction between the panelists down. But we wanted to go ahead and introduce each of the panelists to you. And then provide a little bit of the background, and then also wanted to go through what the high-level themes were from the questions that you all posed on the registration page. So with that, I want to introduce Leigh, Allen Arredondo. She's the head of UX for Spruce Up and podcast host for UX Cake. Leigh, why don't you give a little bit of your background and tell us a little bit about what you're working on?
Sure. So I am at a startup right now, but in my over 25 years of experience, I've been at agencies, I've been at medium-sized companies like Getty Images, large companies like Amazon, and this is my third startup actually. So kind of has run the gamut for me with experience in UX. So that's design and research. So
great. Yeah. And what's Spruce Up, just so people know?
So Spruce Up is a digital stylist for all things home and interior. We match you with a stylist, and it's run through by AI to match you with just the perfect things for your home and that match your lifestyle.
Great, awesome. Thanks for coming. Thanks for being on our panel.
Thank you.
Next we have David Kendall. He's principal of UX and design at AT&T. David, why don't you give us a little bit of your background? And
Sure. Yes, I'm at a little company called AT&T, which I hope all of you are familiar with and have in your pockets. I've been there for about 8 years. It's been a really interesting transition for me because previously to that, I had my own design agency that was focused on retail brands and packaging, kind of a traditional design agency, and I ran that for a number of years. And really saw the change happening and moving into technology and mobile and interaction, and so I got an opportunity to jump over to AT&T, knowing very little of that area, so it was a nice challenge to go in there and work at an enterprise level and a place where there's lots of friction and to try and address those challenges. So the focus of my work there currently is on design systems and design standards and doing a lot of work with promoting best practices and tools and causing just general mischief while I'm there.
Great, thank you. All right, next we have Casey Goddard, and Casey's the head of product for Yotta Digital Ventures. Casey, why don't you tell us a little of your background and what you're working on?
Sure. Hi, I'm Casey Goddard. I have spent most of my career in big companies early on at Sears for about 8 years, where I was fortunate enough to work through many different departments in e-commerce. I got to build a lot of different products. We very much believed in building everything ourselves, so we replaced a lot of third-party partners from the ground up. Then I moved on to Express, where I ran UX and product management for a couple years. We built mobile apps from the ground up and built a lot of capabilities there as well. Then I decided to move to the Pacific Northwest because I really, really missed the West Coast, and I was getting really tired of being in Ohio. So my family loves it a lot better here. Spent a couple years at Primera. Decided that maybe I would try a change from retail and go into healthcare for a while. Needless to say, I'm back in retail. We always thought retail was really slow and behind and hard to push. Healthcare is right there behind us in retail, so it was definitely very challenging, but eye-opening and got to learn a lot there. But now I'm at a startup, so very different environment. It's great. I love it. I love moving fast. I love not having to spend an entire year trying to convince the security team to allow us to use Slack. It's amazing. But e-commerce startup, we've been around for about a year. It is called Yotta Digital Ventures. We are in the middle of trying to rebrand because that doesn't seem to roll off everybody's tongue as a great brand. But We have a couple clients that we're replatforming right now, and our main focus is really building out our services so that we can help mid-size and enterprise companies replatform faster, cheaper than all of the kind of behemoth platforms that are out there today.
Great. And we have Michael Wu, who's the director of UX at UpTop. So Mike, why don't you give us a little of your background and tell us about what you're working on.
Cool. Hi, everybody. I started off my career at Real Networks back in the day. Did a lot of B2B and B2C digital marketing there as a designer. Then followed that up with product design at Big Fish Games. Supporting their digital distribution, so not actually game design. After that, I actually came into my own here at UpTop, really where business, design, and technology came together. It's just been really exciting here at UpTop the past 5 years, working on a lot of great things. Right now, I'm working on a transactional experience, redesigning that for a nonprofit charity gift card company, as well as redesigning the external and internal website for Los Alamos National Laboratory. That's really exciting. The science in me has come back out, since I was a kid. And then I'm also working on a redesign or providing strategy and guidance on the redesign of Oyo Rooms, which is a leading hospitality company in India. We are redoing their UK and US websites, so that's really exciting as well. And last but not least, I am nurturing the product development of a mindfulness kids app called the Laugh Time app. We have a pilot in its second season at Madrona Elementary School, and we are trying to get that integrated right now in Children's Hospital across many departments within that organization. So I'm really excited about that.
So hopefully tonight's going to be one of those discussions where you're like, wow, how did you get all those people in the room at the same time? Wow. And I'm definitely not the smartest one on this panel for sure. But the topic itself, it's relevant, reducing friction, increasing revenue, improving CX. Friction could be digitally, but also I think some of the questions you all posed talk about the friction internally within an organization with stakeholders, so we're going to talk about that as well. And high-level themes from the questions that we gathered, we're going to touch on those, and those are going to guide our conversation tonight. So kind of the highest level theme was, how do you identify the problems that are actually causing the friction? Once you identify the problem causing the friction, what do you do to prioritize the fix for it? What should we do to improve conversion, increase engagement, improve usability, reduce support escalations, work within technical constraints, technical debt, platform issues. And then the biggest, I think, underlying question of all that was, how do I do all this with little budget, little time, and lack of understanding from my leadership? That seemed to be something that popped up a lot from the audience. And so that kind of leads into the last two, which are how to get internal alignment with stakeholder buy-in, and how do we prove the value of UX and show ROI. And so I think the breadth and depth of your experience, the panelists, your industry experience, again, breadth and depth of that is going to really lead to this conversation. So I'm really excited about starting the conversation off. So why don't we start with the first topic of how do we identify the problems causing friction? And some people already said they wanted to pass on this because it's kind of like down here. But I'm going to just have either, David, I don't know if you want to start with this one, but what are some things that you've run into out there where you've had to say, okay, how do we start identifying the problems that are causing friction? And then we'll kind of go, just toss it around amongst the panelists to talk about that.
Yeah, that's a great start. In thinking about this topic earlier on, friction, I was thinking, well, that's kind of everywhere in many ways. It's really something that is always going to be part of the work that we do, and it's just inherent and a byproduct of whenever you get people who are inherently irrational and unpredictable interacting with technology, which is constantly changing. So I kept on thinking, well, the ideal is to eliminate friction, but in reality, you're never going to totally eliminate it. And friction, like I said, friction is always going to be, around us. But identifying it is the key, right? Because you want to make sure that you make things as seamless and effortless as possible. And I've always found that there's two ways of really engaging or addressing friction, is either through research, really understanding the user and the insights that you gain from users. And then the second part is really understanding their journey as they go through engaging and interacting with your product or your site or whatever the technology is. And I think those are always the two fundamental things I always come back to as the initial starting place. And then from then, there's all sorts of strategies, whether it's application of a technology or engaging third party or creating internal teams to address it. But fundamentally, it starts with user research and the customer journey.
So what are some maybe scrappy methods or different ways that you all have employed, or maybe even challenges that you've faced when saying, hey, we need to do some research? I don't know who wants to take that one first, but maybe Casey, I don't know if you want to start with that.
Sure. When I was at Express, we didn't have a research team. We didn't have a lot of money. I tried to hire somebody and was told no. I was told no, that's not really important. So what we ended up doing is really, I ended up hiring designers who were kind of full stack, who could do everything, and we taught them how to do all of their own user testing. So we had usertesting.com in place, and they were able to run tests, validate their designs within hours, and continue moving on. Getting really scrappy is just walking around, talking to other people, trying to just, get people to interact with your comps and your prototypes and give you a little feedback, which I think probably, is pretty common when you don't have budgets to work with. Trying to think scrappy, huh? I was blessed when I was at Sears and Primera. We had pretty robust research teams, so we didn't have to get too scrappy at those places. But
All right. How about you, Mike?
Yeah, I mentioned that transactional charity gift card project that I'm working on. I mean, talk about scrappy. We enlisted a lot of folks here working at WeWork to be our participants in terms of doing some usability testing, and we're actually going to reach out to them again in a couple weeks. But I mean, I think the scrappiest is just picking somebody in our own office who, somewhat fits that demographic, right? If you really can't find somebody or you need to get it done, ASAP, but those are some simple ways. I mean, I've even used my wife, right, to be a participant as well, just to get some immediate feedback. In fact, I asked her something last night, so that's always helpful for sure.
So Leigh, what about you? How about any ways that you've, maybe methods you've used to identify friction, things you may be doing now, things you may have done at Amazon, different perspectives from different size companies?
Yeah, sure. I mean, often it can be helpful to take a look at the Google Analytics, and you work with your customer service people, and you work with your product management and business folks to help guide you. So when we all have limited resources, so you at least know where to start looking. But yeah, when I kind of heard the list of questions of how do you find friction, and then my first thought was, that's the easy part. I feel like finding the friction is kind of the simplest part, or identifying what the friction is. It's user research and user journey mapping, those are super effective with every size company I've been at. That's been, it's not always 100%, but it's pretty effective.
Great. And on the journey mapping part, because each of you kind of mentioned that, maybe not directly, but indirectly, is that a method that you've used to get stakeholder buy-in, to show value within your organization as well as learn about the user? Is that a tool that you might use for that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a great tool because it does a number of things. It can really help identify the happy path and visualize the happy path to success. It can also create a roadmap of what you need to address in terms of improvements to the experience or elimination of any friction. It just really helps clarify the entire steps of the journey and aligns it to either design or technology or product marketing needs.
Great.
So in some of the journey mapping that we've done, that we did at Primera, we actually had a lot of people there who didn't come from healthcare, so we didn't really understand the customer journey or what they were going through, and we had multiple different audiences that we had to serve, so our employers and producers and providers and the members as well. So we were in the middle of rebuilding our employer experience, and none of us really knew what that was. So we had the opportunity to go sit at our employers' offices and sit at providers' offices and sit at producers' offices and watch them all day long as they work and ask them questions. The quotes that we got from them that we took back, even if we could say, oh, this is a problem, we need to work on it, it still didn't break through until we're like, well, so-and-so said that they really hate working with us because of this, and having those specific quotes to bring back from real people, that's the kind of stuff that sunk in with people. And as we implemented customer feedback, and that started coming in, which was just implemented when I started there, being able to take those quotes and share them around the company, that's the stuff that started moving people and getting people on board.
That's great.
So I agree with everybody here about journey mapping, but to be honest, from my perspective, we don't always get to do that, right? It's a little bit more effort. Sometimes it's really about identifying the top KPIs that you're trying to achieve, right, or are measuring, and just identifying the user task, right, and what it would take to achieve those KPIs, and just looking for those gaps, right? Using methods like what you asked, Craig, pouring through the analytics, finding where there are friction points, right? A combination of usability testing, things like that, to identify those opportunities and make fixes. And it might be design, it might be messaging, it might be technical related. Those are all obvious UX friction points, but the one thing we haven't talked about in terms of friction, and I was talking to I think David and Leigh earlier, is that people are oftentimes friction points. And what I mean by that is internally, right? So if there's not alignment within your organization, oftentimes the byproduct of what you see is what's happening within your organization, right? It could be a conflict of goals, inconsistencies, all that stuff, right? And that bubbles up and gets exposed externally. So, I mean, that's something that I don't think we've really touched on yet, but I'm sure we will.
Yeah, it's a good point, Michael. It's definitely internal friction is a big issue beyond just the product. But I still like the holistic approach of customer journeys and how they can rally a team, because you can get a bunch of the disciplines together to really take a look at the issues from the customer perspective and the customer journey. And it does help rally the team in many ways. And these can be extremely built out, or they can be really informal depending on your budgets, your needs, your timing. So I love the flexibility of the customer journey approach. And then the other thing, it's also a great way of just kicking off an attempt to reduce friction. It's a great, have a friction workshops based around running a customer journey is a great way of starting to get the ball running, identifying some quick hits or quick wins, or put together a roadmap to address larger issues. So it's a great tool overall.
That's great. So just quick audience poll, kind of old school, raise your hand. In your role or at your company, are you employing customer journey mapping? Yes? Yeah, about 60%, 70%. So maybe something to check out in terms of helping you move the needle with identifying those friction points. So I guess since finding the friction might be easy or obvious or identifiable at different points in the journey, what do you do once you find the problem? Or what are some methods or some things that you've done to kind of fix the issue, or shouldn't say fix it, prioritize the fixes? Because I think prioritizing is always a challenge. Everything seems important, right?
Yeah, I was going to say earlier that that is really the challenge that I've always seen. Everyone can agree on the friction points, but everybody has a different opinion about which aspects are the worst, which need to be the highest priority. Everyone has their own pet peeves. Everyone has a wife or a mother or a brother who has had this one particular problem, and so that is definitely the one we should fix first, especially if it's an SVP or board member. So I think the prioritization is really important, and it's really important to do it across team functions. Make sure that your primary stakeholders are in the room. You've got product and design and development. And you do a prioritization list based on your top 3 KPIs. Basically, everyone needs to be aligned on. Hopefully everyone's already aligned on the KPIs. Sometimes that's a problem too, but that's a different panel. Yep. So, I've found it really simple and effective to give each of these line items a score, 1, 2, or 3, like how effective it would be towards each KPI. And then at the end, we add up those scores, and it's kind of like a roadmap just made itself. I like that approach.
That's great. How about anyone else in terms of how you've prioritized or helped prioritize?
Yeah, it's similar to Leigh as well, except I'm a pretty simple man, so I don't use complex KPIs. I follow this model of PI. Have you heard of PI? Where I take a look at the issues that have been identified, probably from a customer journey, and then based upon the characteristics of potential, importance, and ease, kind of map them to those and grade them, on a scale of 1 to 10. So, in terms of potential, how much will this project really impact potential growth or revenue or whatever you need to address? Importance, what's the value of that project in addressing that? And then ease, how easy or complex is it going to be to implement it? So kind of helps to give a little bit of quantified assessment to be able to rank projects from 1 to 10, divide them by 3, you start getting a listing. Then you, like Leigh said, you got a roadmap to address the ones that are really important. It also gives you somewhat quantifiable data to show and share with others on why you're taking this project on and the order that you're doing it. So that's kind of another simple way of doing that, kind of extending that model.
That's great. Any other ideas, suggestions?
So when I was at Express, I was tasked with coming up with a unified roadmap across merchandising, marketing, analytics, engineering, operations, and design, which was no easy task because they all wanted different things, and everything they wanted was extremely important for them. So what we did is we went through a couple exercises together, and the first one is getting all the leadership together and aligning on those goals. So we all knew what our revenue forecast was. We knew what we had to achieve, but we all aligned on a set of goals of what we believed was going to help us get there. Then the next step was we all got into a room. We brought our lists of everything we thought we needed to do from a development perspective and deliver on the experience. And what we ask them to do is not to come in with, go build me this or go build me that, but tell me what problem you're solving, which was really difficult. And if they couldn't tell me what problem they were solving, it automatically got taken off the list. But we ended up walking out of there in agreement on a set of stuff that was actually achievable for the year. I did have to keep reminding people, think bonus, not what you really want, but think, at the end of the day, we're all trying to get our bonus here. Unfortunately, that's what motivated a lot of them to stay focused. By staying focused on our goals, focusing on the problem of what we needed to solve, I was able to get the merchandising team, who was notorious for asking for everything, to walk out of that room and agree that year that they were going to get absolutely nothing. But they were happy because they knew at the end of the day, because we'd gone through that whole exercise, we all understood our goals, we all aligned on them, that what we were doing was going to help us achieve that. And they had a say in it, they had a voice. They got to turn down stuff that they didn't believe was going to help us get there, and they got to be part of that process of deciding what it was we were going to do. So it was hard. It took me over a year of being there to figure out how to get all these people together, but they all walked out happy with what we were going to do for the year.
That's great.
Yeah, and I would say, similar to everybody else up here, we do the same thing. We just call it impact versus effort. We run our clients through that exercise and just make sure we have a representation from design, development, as well as product, and making sure everybody has their say. But again, make it quantifiable to sew back up in terms of what everybody should be working on.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking about this. When you're trying to get alignment like that, is it beneficial to be the new person or to be the person that's been there a while or be an outsider? Does it depend on the company or what's been your experience?
I think at AT&T, being a long-term established employee is not a good thing, because it's really hard to change, and you get kind of sucked into the mentality of the way things are, business as usual. So when I first started at AT&T, it was great. Everything was new and fresh, and I felt like I had excuses to make mistakes and a lot of leeway, and it was a much better position than I am now, which is 8 years later. I feel like, oh my God, I'm starting to believe and do business as usual, and it's hard for me to break free. So I definitely think the new face is better.
Yeah, thanks for your honesty on that.
I think as a consultant, it's easier for us because they bring us in specifically for that, right? It's like we have superpowers or something, and they expect us to be able to have the voice of the C-suite, right? So we're just lucky like that.
I would have to agree with that. Like in all the various types of positions I've had, being a consultant, gives you a voice that that even as head of UX, I might not have, So I've also worked with teams who have brought me in specifically because of that, because they knew that we would be in alignment. They knew the right thing to do, but they knew that it needed to come from someone somewhere else. So
that's great. That right there was nuggets. I mean, in terms of real knowledge of being in a big company for a long period of time or being in a role, I thought that was really helpful. So thanks for sharing that. So we've kind of talked about how to identify the problems, then how to prioritize the problems. And what I'm hearing under it all is a lot of it is the leadership to really get people to buy in. Is that it's not just being in your role as a design or product or on the business side, but it's how do I get all these folks moving in the same direction? Would you agree? So I think that we should jump to that topic, and then as we kind of wrap that up and talk about how to convince people, if you will, then I want to open it up to Q&A to the audience, because I think there'll be some big questions there. But so what are some of the things that you've done well or maybe not done well in your roles to try to get alignment, buy-in, heck, you may not even be able to, right? The reality may be that you can't. And I think it'd be nice to share some of those real-life stories with the audience. So whoever wants to go first, go first.
Can I start?
You're welcome
And
to
then,
start.
and then I'm sure Casey will follow. Typically when we start engagements, we love to host workshops with our clients. And when Casey was with Primera, it was probably the largest workshop we ever hosted. It was 20 to 30 people, and typically we only want 6 to 8 folks, right? Key stakeholders, keep it intimate, and really problem solve. And so when you said you were going to bring over all those folks, we were just like, shocked.
I know.
To say the least.
You begged and pleaded me.
To say the least,
Please
right?
leave them. Leave them.
But in terms of alignment, right, it was, and you can tell me how it went afterwards, but it was great to see all the folks there, be somewhat on the same page, at least when we were in the same room, to hear the same goals, to get familiar with the design process. That was all valuable stuff that, as outsider, being able to see, I just think it's critical, right, to the start of any engagement, because if you don't have that, it doesn't matter what you do. It'll start falling apart at the seams towards the end, right? But again, I'm going to hand it over to you because I'm curious what happened when the workshops were over.
I think for the most part, we stayed aligned. Yeah, for the most part. Inside Primera, when I started there, I inherited a team of it was about 24 people, mostly product managers, whose roles were pretty much order takers. So while I came in expecting them to lead strategy and the vision for their products and really drive it, they were like, no, the business just always tells us what to do and we just have to do it, and that's just the way it is. So I know that company taking the approach of going in very forceful, demanding that you guys, that these are my product managers and you have to listen to them and we're responsible for the website, wasn't going to work there. So what I did is I spent a lot of time with my team, really trying to empower them and get them to think differently. And I told them it's all up to you guys. Like, I can't go and change things here on my own. You guys need to step up. You guys need to build trust and build relationships. And you need to go out there with a strategy. You need to understand your data. You need to understand your product and have a vision for that. And you need to go pitch that. Which was something totally unlike what they've ever done. Somebody would say, go add a checkbox here, and they're like, okay, we'll go add a checkbox there on the website. And I don't know if you guys use the website, you probably will see where all those little checkboxes have been added, and you're like, why? There could be a better experience there, but that's because it was all being driven by the business, and there wasn't thought about a more holistic approach about how we could make that better. So my product managers really started digging in and getting data. They sat on phone calls for hours and hours and hours listening to customers so that they could go in and really understand what the big changes that they needed to make were and how they were going to improve the experience. And we had this vision, we were going to make healthcare work better. So what does that mean to them? And they would take these ideas and they would go into the businesses and get that support. So I had a product manager responsible for claims, and he made friends with every single person who touched claims. Like, they all knew him by first name. They, waved at him when he went by. They all respected him, and at a certain point looked to him to drive that strategy, where before I'd come in, it was just they would tell him what to do. So long story short, what I found is relationships take you a long way, sometimes more so than data. But the data gets it over the finish line, and really understanding your product and being able to speak to it.
Yeah, Casey, that's exactly right. With my experience at AT&T was my success or sometimes lack of success was built upon relationships, and that being able to establish trust and demonstrate that you can get the work done and establish relationships so you can understand motivations of everybody. It really helps in achieving that buy-in. It's a lot of work, but it definitely pays off in the end. But
Yeah, my story actually was very much the same. So I'll tell it very briefly. But it comes down to relationships, I think. When I was at Amazon, I worked in Kindle content, and I led experiences for authors. And authors who worked with Amazon had 35 completely different experiences that they had to go through that were all Amazon, like literally different websites that were all Amazon. And it was terrible. We got, so we got really bad information or, feedback from authors all the time about that. That was a huge friction point. The friction there was simply having questions all the time and not knowing where to go to get answers. And because that was seen as a friction, it wasn't easily tied to a KPI, and certainly not, each one of these product teams had their own KPIs. So who's going to drive that? What I did was I used a little bit of, I did have something on my side, which was the SVP had sent out an email saying, "This is crazy. This shouldn't be so hard." And so I put together a little presentation about how there's 35, different experiences, and I shopped it around to all the different product teams, and I took a little twist on it, based on how it would improve their customer experience, because Amazon is customer obsessed. And so with each, I just took it around to all these different teams and got alignment on creating a new experience that would be like a unified vision, actually. I also gave it a name, Unified Author Experience. And so those things actually got a product that was made called Amazon for Authors. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, one other thing that I found very helpful is just constant communication throughout the whole process. At AT&T, big organization, just being able to constantly publish and disseminate activities and actions and metrics, I think, was really helpful, so that there was a understanding of the progress made, the tasks that have been achieved, and it was something that could be kind of paraded around the company and demonstrate that things are getting done, despite the fact that it may not look like things are getting done.
Yeah, I think that's great. And from a leadership perspective, that's really insightful. And kind of going back down to being an individual contributor, because some folks here are leaders, some people are individual contributors, some people are everything, right? They're an army of one. As an individual contributor, without maybe the title or perhaps, are there some tips that you have for them in terms of getting alignment? It seems like speaking the language of who you're talking to, giving them some visuals and some stats and data, but anything that you can share with the audience there, and then we'll go into Q&A after that.
I'll just quickly mention just endless curiosity. It goes a long way. Just showing interest in other areas, whether it's SEO or IT or product marketing, and it doesn't have to be in-depth, deep curiosity, but just showing a willingness to try and understand others helps a lot, and it starts that conversation.
I think if you're trying to pitch to leadership or convince them of something, you have to speak their language. I think it's obvious, but then I think oftentimes it gets lost, right? Like you were trying to sell a design or whatnot. It's not about the colors. It's not about that, although they may get fixated on those kind of things. You just really have to speak their language, which is business, right? And so just really selling those aspects, and even framing the slides, if you will, around those, right? Like conversion rates and all that stuff. Nice charts and stuff like that they understand.
That's another thing too with my product team that I said you may think that you have your own goals, but you have to go to the business and you have to understand their goals and you have to adopt their goals. So we may think that the experience needs to go this way and we've got to build this new feature. But if it doesn't support the business growth that they need to achieve, then it's probably not the right thing to do, even though we know, that it could improve the customer experience. I mean, coming from where I was, there's a lot of things that could improve it, so we have to prioritize. But I told each one of them, every different business has got a different set of goals, and it's your job to go in there and sit at the table with them and adopt those goals and make them your own.
That's great. So I'd love to do a Q&A. If anyone has questions, I'm going to walk around with the microphone. And I think you feel free to ask any question in terms of even the questions that you posed on the registration page, because I know we didn't touch all of them. We just hit the high-level themes. So I'm going to walk around. Whoever has questions, feel free to chime in. Anyone?
Casey has agreed to answer the hard ones, right?
Yeah.
You're going to do the hard ones?
You were going to rap.
Yeah. If no one asks questions, Dave is going to wrap. So anyone have any questions specific to the topic tonight, or even asking questions of the individuals?
Hi. So I'm not sure if I buy into the concept that you can eradicate friction on a website, but let's say you have a website that's humming. And aside from new business requirements or significant changes in business requirements, you've got a website that's humming. Do you take the approach of, if it's not broke, you don't fix it, and you just wait until your statistics tell you need to refresh your site? Or are you more proactive? And if you are more proactive, what is it that tells you it's time?
I'll try to answer some of that. We have a client that falls under that similar description that you just gave, and I think if you did that, put it on cruise control, you would potentially become complacent and get into trouble. I think God, with the web, things are just changing so fast and so often that you should always be proactive, like you said. Doing UX evaluations if you can. I don't know if you have that in-house, but it's always good to do that because you just don't know, right? You always should be assessing the competition, making sure you stay one step ahead, because again, you just don't want to get complacent for sure.
Yeah, I think the constant assessment is a requirement because people change. Behaviors change, learnings happen, technology changes dramatically. So there's always things that need to be optimized, and it's never. I don't think there's anything that's a completely effortless, seamless site. It's always going to be needing to be optimized to respond to those changes in the people and technology.
But another interesting point to her question was, how do you determine where? Like, any of you have ideas?
Well, David, you said technology changes often. I think if you're a good product manager, you should always be trying to add value to your customers. So if there's new technologies out there, seeing where there might be some sort of match there, that's a good place to start. Especially if nothing's really broken. But again, just trying to add value, right? Improve engagement, right?
Yeah, I think there's new ways of interacting too through new technology, gesture, 3D. How can you adopt AI, machine learning, predictive modeling? All that stuff is worthwhile exploring to optimize the experience.
But there's an element of risk.
Definitely. Risk and paid off by value, right?
Right, and so you've got to look at that risk. You have to do a really good, scrape of the landscape and say, machine learning, for example, is your company capable of implementing or adopting any machine learning levels with any success? It's very complicated in terms of what new technologies and when you should adopt them, right?
Yeah, there's there's benefits of being a late adopter too, to wait till those technologies come down and become more approachable.
Another potential way of looking at it is which part of the funnel has the most opportunity for growth. Is it the top of the funnel, middle funnel, end of the funnel? And maybe focus on whichever one seems like has the most room to grow.
To add to your question, in terms of tooling, things that you may use to analyze, to review, to watch, do you have any tool sets that you would suggest, recommend, things that you've used for the audience?
You mean like sentiment evaluation, or
it could be any of
something
that.
like that?
It could be user behavior monitoring tools, could be audience polling, things like that.
Sentiment. So when I was working it was in the app, mobile app. We use sentiment monitors. I don't know off the top of my head the names of them. There's a whole lot of them. So you can use sentiment evaluation and sentiment monitors to go through and read yours and your competitors' reviews, and then they score them by a whole lot of different ways that they score them. And it's a really good way to identify where either you or your competitor is not meeting expectations and where the friction is happening.
I'm a big fan of understanding the customers and behaviors. And so one tool that I've found to be really successful is we have a customer forum. And this was established a long time ago. It's just an informal group of AT&T fans who are avid users or familiar, and it's a simple way of tossing them projects to take a look at, our experiences, and get some quick feedback. So it's very cheap, because all we do is toss them a few goodies every now and then, and they like to talk about the experience, the products, and again, it's very cheap to set up and actively maintain.
It's funny you said that, because at Big Fish, they had, at the time, Big Fish forums, and some of the top customers were called whales, and they had a specific section in the forums in which we would always go out to them. They had product ideas. They tested our products, and we flew them in from around the world to come to the office and just treated them like VIPs, just because they added so much value to the overall ecosystem, right? In fact, they almost drove design, to be honest, because at the time we led like the redesign of the entire thing, right? But because they were so adamant about not changing things, we purposely did not roll it out, because they said, no, we like it how it is. And it was a little frustrating, but again, they spent the most money with us, so they had our ear.
All right. Any other questions? We'd love to ask. All right.
Thank you. So when you're looking at your analytics or your user journeys, what are your best ideas for being able to avoid cutting out what could be meaningful differentiation in a crowded field when basically the competition and the rest of the industry is trending towards certain conformity?
Can you give us an example by any chance?
Like, say, for example, the landscape's changing in a certain direction where everyone's following specific design trends, and you noticed like an outlier in your data or your user journey. That how do you make sure you don't lose that when you're saying, okay, we need to change in this way to mirror the rest of the field or industry? Identify opportunity versus conformance. Does that help?
Is there an opportunity to get user input on those differentiators, whether they actually are differentiators or not in the user's
I would say
mind?
more like I guess my question is more about like the phase before you realize that you have to do your customer interviews and that sort of thing. Like, how do you realize that there's that kind of opportunity?
We've been stumped.
Sorry.
Well, I'm sure we can figure this out. Hang on. So before you realize that you need to do research, you're looking at analytics. Oh, Craig, can you give him the...
Just see that something's different. And how do you know the difference between like, okay, it's just kind of like a bump that we need to smooth over to like conform to like the changing landscape versus, wait a second, I think I've got something here. Like, do you have any good examples of when that's happened in your career?
It sounds like you're talking about a trend versus a meaningful
More of a fork in the road.
fork in the yeah.
Like you have the opportunity to either say, hey, we're behind standards, or like we're not doing what everyone else is doing, or something to that extent. But I figure every now and again it happens where you're like, there's an opportunity here. We have meaningful differentiation. And that's where you go into like, obviously like your customer interviews. But I was just wondering if you guys had any good examples of where that kind of experience has come up for you, and where you've been able to capitalize off of emergent differentiation when market trends are going in a more conforming way.
I might have something. If I'm getting this right, I might have. This was a long time ago, but I think it's a really good example of sometimes bucking what the norm might be for reducing friction. When I was at Getty Images, we were working very hard to improve the customer service and to reduce customer service by improving the user experience, so that they wouldn't need to call customer service. And what we found was that when they and we found this by talking to a lot of people internally, when they called customer service, it was an opportunity to upsell them on more expensive imagery. So there was certain amount of friction that we needed to reduce, and that would be the what would result in customer delight, customer satisfaction. But there was a certain amount of friction that we didn't really have to fix. There would be questions. We didn't have to answer every question, perhaps, or it was a long time ago, so I don't remember exactly some of the things that would lead people to call. But that was an interesting differentiator, because Getty Images had really wonderful customer service, and so I don't know if that exactly answers or is what you're asking about.
Well, it sounds like you're talking about zigging versus zagging, right? Where in terms of brand positioning, and Marty Neumeier wrote a book many years ago called Zigzag, and it outlines that entire thing about how it's more about friction in the marketplace, not necessarily friction in the experience, where you definitely want to establish friction to stand out, to differentiate, to create a meaningful separator from your competition. So in that sense, it's a different strategy unrelated to the experience, but more related to the brand.
All right. So we have time for one last question, and then we're going to wrap up the discussion. So does anyone have a question that you'd like to ask? Hold on.
This is actually off a point that you were just making, Michael, and Casey as well. You were talking about your experience at Big Fish and running changes inside the organization and looking at your largest customers. And sometimes your largest customers are actually lagging indicators of where your business is going. It's where your business has been. And I'm part of a software company at the moment that's about 15 years old, and we're going through a transition from on-premise solutions to cloud solutions. And our largest customers, who are currently our largest customers and currently what we consider our most important, but probably not our best customers long-term, are bucking that trend. We're seeing a lot of market direction towards, yes, I mean, it's kind of obvious we have to go there, but there's a lot of internal friction where the business understands that that's the right thing to do, but there's also fear of, well, what do we do about the current ARR that we have? Do you have any sort of guidance on driving that internal transformation? The reason I ask is because, like, I'm the PM responsible for doing this.
Good luck.
That's what I feel like every day.
That's a tough one.
The one thing I can think about from a strategy perspective is involving those folks. So if you know where you want to go, fold them into your process, right? Make them feel like they are part of that positive change and really sell them on it, right? Because the worst thing that you could do is to make that change and spring it on them. And they're just like, you know, they get all pissed off and stuff like that, and you're going to hear it and stuff like that, right? So, again, really embrace them and figure out a way to have them be involved. Maybe be a part of the design reviews, the usability testing, et cetera, and so that they aren't surprised. That's all I can think of.
I would even take it one step further, is make it their idea. Figure out how to do that. Give them everything that they need to go sell it, and talk about what a brilliant idea it is, and then they're the star, and you get done what you want, and we all win.
All right. Well, this has been fun. I mean, the conversation was great. The questions were great. We have 15 minutes until last call. So I want to wrap up the panel discussion so you all can hang out and socialize. And I'm sure you have a lot of questions that you want to ask individually, where you didn't want to do it through a microphone. So you're welcome to do that. We want to thank you all for attending and participating. And we're going to post a replay of this if there's any elements that you wanted to re-listen to or watch. And we'll let you all know when that happens. And we'll send out a post-event survey as well, just to get your feedback and also get some ideas for future topics, things like that you'd like to see. So with that, I want to thank all the panelists for being here, and thank you all for participating, and enjoy your evening. Thanks a lot.